You have read the book, maybe more than once. You highlighted the passages, you nodded along, you felt that unmistakable feeling of recognition, the sense that something important was being handed to you, and then you tried to apply it. You sat down, you said the words, you followed the steps as best you understood them, and nothing happened. Or nothing that felt real, or something shifted briefly and then dissolved back into the same familiar patterns, the same doubts, the same ceiling. And somewhere in the gap between the promise of the page and the experience of your actual life, a quiet suspicion crept in. Maybe this doesn't work for me. Maybe I am doing it wrong. Maybe the people who swear by this book found something in it that I simply cannot locate. That gap between understanding autosuggestion as an idea and actually experiencing it as a living force is where most readers of Think and Grow Rich get quietly, permanently stuck. And it is not their fault, because the chapter on autosuggestion is, by nearly any honest measure, the most misunderstood chapter Napoleon Hill ever wrote. And what is missing in almost every explanation of it changes everything. Here is the question I want you to hold as we go through this together. Have you ever tried to use autosuggestion and felt like you were performing it rather than living it, like the words were leaving your mouth but going nowhere? Leave your answer in the comments. You are not alone in that experience, and naming it is the first step towards something different. Most people, when they hear the word autosuggestion, immediately picture affirmations. They picture someone standing in front of a mirror, repeating confident-sounding statements about money and success, feeling slightly ridiculous, waiting for a result that does not quite arrive. And they are not entirely wrong. That image does contain a version of what Hill was describing. But it contains roughly the same amount of the real thing as a photograph of a fire contains heat. The shape is there. The substance is not. Napoleon Hill dedicated an entire chapter of Think and Grow Rich to autosuggestion because he considered it the central mechanism of the entire book, the bridge between desire and its physical equivalent. He wrote that autosuggestion is the agency of communication between the conscious and subconscious portions of the mind. Not a technique, an agency, a living channel of communication that is always open, always transmitting, whether you are deliberately using it or not. That distinction is enormous, and most people walk right past it. Think of the conscious mind as the part of you that reads, analyzes, plans, and evaluates. It is smart, capable, and almost entirely powerless over the deep patterns of behavior and expectation that actually govern your life. The subconscious mind, in Hill's framework, is where those patterns live, and it does not take instructions from logic. It takes instructions from repetition fused with emotion, from feeling, from the inner voice that speaks not when you are trying, but when you are not trying, in the quiet moments, in the reflexive responses, in the automatic interpretations you place on the events of your daily life. Autosuggestion, properly understood, is not what you say to yourself when you are sitting down to practice. It is what you are saying to yourself all the time. The practice is simply the act of bringing that constant stream of self-communication under deliberate control, rather than leaving it to run on whatever programming was installed in you by accident over years of living. Picture a radio tower. It broadcasts continuously. It does not pause to ask whether the signal is the signal you want to send. It simply transmits whatever is loaded into it. Your subconscious is the receiving station, and it records every broadcast. The question Hill was asking, the question most readers of Think and Grow Rich never quite arrive at, is this: what are you broadcasting? And do you know, there was a man I once heard about who had read Think and Grow Rich 4 times over a decade. He knew the chapter on autosuggestion cold. He could discuss its principles in conversation with real clarity, and yet his financial situation, his relationships, his sense of personal possibility had barely moved in all that time. When someone finally sat with him and asked him to narrate his inner monologue, not the practice version, but the running commentary in his mind on an ordinary afternoon, what came out was a relentless, low-level broadcast of inadequacy. Not dramatic self-hatred, just a steady hum of not quite enough. He had been adding deliberate affirmations to a system that was already broadcasting something else 23 hours a day and wondering why the signal was confused. This is where it gets interesting. In the age of self-help, autosuggestion has been both popularized and diluted to the point where most people encounter only its shadow. Apps serve you morning affirmations. Journals prompt you to write down what you are grateful for. Podcasts remind you to reprogram your mindset. None of it is wrong, exactly, but all of it tends to treat autosuggestion as a discrete activity, a thing you do at 7 a.m. for 5 minutes, rather than as the continuous inner weather of your entire mental life. Hill's insight was not that a few minutes of positive self-talk would change your life. His insight was that the totality of your self-talk is already changing your life, whether you intend it to or not. The reframe here is both unsettling and freeing. You are not someone who needs to start using autosuggestion. You are someone who's been using it without interruption since the day you first formed a thought about who you are and what you are worth. What are you currently broadcasting? The reason the chapter on autosuggestion and Think and Grow Rich is so consistently misunderstood comes down to one word that Hill used repeatedly, deliberately, and which almost every reader skips over in their rush to get to the practical instructions. That word is emotion. Hill was direct on this point. He wrote that the subconscious mind does not respond to the language of words. It responds to the language of feeling. He believed that a statement repeated without emotional engagement passes through the mind like water through a screen. It doesn't grip, doesn't root, doesn't change anything. But a statement, even a brief one, even a simple one, that is felt deeply, that is charged with genuine desire or faith or conviction, lodges itself in the subconscious with an efficiency that no amount of cold repetition can match. This is the missing ingredient that reduces autosuggestion from a living practice to an empty ritual for most people who attempt it. They repeat the words, they skip the feeling, and then they conclude that the method doesn't work, when what has actually happened is that they have been using half the method and wondering why they are getting half the results. Hill described the relationship between emotion and autosuggestion using the analogy of a seed and soil. The subconscious mind is the soil, fertile, receptive, ready to grow whatever is planted in it. But a seed dropped on the surface of the soil without being pressed in, without moisture, without warmth, will not germinate. Emotion is the warmth. Emotion is what takes the seed, the thought, the intention, the self-directed statement, and presses it into the subconscious with enough depth and heat to take root. Without it, you are not planting anything. You are just standing in a garden, dropping seeds on pavement. There was a woman I once heard described who had tried affirmations for years with genuinely disappointing results. She was disciplined about it, morning and night, the same statements, precisely worded, consistently practiced, but she described the experience as feeling like a performance, like she was reading from a script in a language she didn't quite speak. She felt almost embarrassed doing it, which meant that the dominant emotion she was associating with the practice was not faith or desire, it was mild self-consciousness. The subconscious, faithfully recording the dominant emotional signal, had been dutifully reinforcing exactly that, the feeling of being slightly outside the thing she was reaching for. When she stopped performing the words and started instead spending a few quiet minutes genuinely contacting the feeling of what she wanted without words at first, just the felt sense of the life she was moving toward, something shifted. The words, when she returned to them, carried a different charge. and the charge is everything. In today's performance culture, where visible productivity is the primary measure of effort, sitting quietly with a feeling seems dangerously unproductive. It looks like nothing. It cannot be photographed for social media. It does not fill a box on a habit tracker. And yet, it is precisely this unperformable inner act, the genuine, private, felt engagement with what you desire that Hill placed at the absolute center of autosuggestion. Not the routine, the reality of the feeling within the routine. The invitation here is specific. The next time you sit down with any version of autosuggestion practice, any statement, any affirmation, any written goal, pause before the words. Ask yourself, can I feel this? Not force the feeling, not perform it. Just ask honestly, is there any genuine emotional reality behind what I am about to say? If there is, let it lead. If there isn't, that information is useful too. And if something in what we have covered so far has clicked into place, if you have had a quiet, that's why it wasn't working moment, this might be exactly the right time to leave that in the comments. This conversation gets richer when more people are having it. There is a dimension of Hill's autosuggestion teaching that almost no one discusses, and it is frankly the most interesting one. Hill did not simply say that the conscious mind should send positive messages to the subconscious. He went further, and the further part changes everything. He believed that the subconscious mind, once properly instructed, does not merely encourage you or make you feel better. It begins to function as a problem-solving intelligence that operates largely outside of conscious awareness, drawing on sources of information and insight that the rational, analytical mind cannot access through deliberate thought alone. He wrote about what he called infinite intelligence, a concept that some readers find too mystical to take seriously and others find profoundly resonant. But underneath the theological language, there is something psychologically verifiable. The human subconscious is a vastly more capable instrument than the conscious mind typically gives it credit for. Every person who has ever woken at 3 a.m. with the solution to a problem they had been consciously stuck on for days has experienced a version of what Hill was describing. The conscious mind goes quiet. The deeper intelligence goes to work. And what emerges is not reasoned out, but arrived at appearing whole, suddenly, from somewhere that reasoning alone could not reach. Hill's claim was that autosuggestion is the deliberate way of assigning problems and purposes to that deeper intelligence of handing something to the subconscious and trusting it to work while the conscious mind sleeps or rests, or does other things. Think of it as commissioning a master craftsman. You do not stand over the craftsman's shoulder, micromanaging each movement of the chisel. You describe clearly and passionately what you want to create. You ensure the craftsman has understood the assignment, and then you step back and allow the craft to happen. The conscious mind's role in autosuggestion is to give the clear, emotionally vivid commission. The subconscious mind's role is to work on it. There was a young man I once heard about who had been trying to write a business plan for 2 years. He had all the intelligence and ambition needed, but every time he sat down to work, he would stall, overthinking, second-guessing, producing paragraphs, and then deleting them. He had been, without realizing it, insisting that his conscious mind carry the entire weight of the project. On the advice of someone he trusted, he started spending a few minutes each night before sleep giving the problem to a different part of himself. Not planning, not strategizing, just holding the vision of the finished plan, what it would feel like to have it complete, what it would make possible, and then releasing it. The next morning, on the 3rd day of this practice, he sat down and wrote for 4 hours without stopping. Not because he had figured it all out consciously, because something deeper had. This is not mysticism. It is the way the human mind works when you stop fighting it and start working with it. Autosuggestion at its deepest level is not about talking yourself into believing something. It is about establishing a clear, felt, repeated communication with the most capable intelligence. You have access to the one that runs below the waterline of conscious thought and trusting it to do what it does when given proper direction. The question worth asking is not whether this works. The question is whether you have ever actually tried it fully, with feeling, with patience, without turning it back into a performance. By now, a picture has been building, and if you have been leaning into it, if something here is shifting the way you understand what autosuggestion actually is, then you are in good company. Some of the people who have had the most transformative experiences with Hill's ideas have described a moment not unlike this. Not the moment they first read the book, but the moment they finally understood what the book was actually saying. If this is that moment for you, or even the beginning of it, consider passing this along to someone in your world who is also in that space between reading and living what they have read. Sometimes the right conversation finds the right person at exactly the right time. One of the most practical things Hill taught about autosuggestion, and one of the most consistently overlooked, was the importance of specificity, not vague aspiration. Not, I want to be successful, or I want to feel better about myself. He was insistent that the subconscious mind, like any skilled craftsman, requires a precise brief, a specific goal. A clear picture, a defined outcome with enough detail that the intelligence working on it knows exactly what it is working toward. Hill believed that vagueness was one of the primary reasons intelligent, motivated people failed to produce results with their inner work. The subconscious cannot efficiently navigate toward a fog. It needs coordinates. And producing those coordinates, the specific, emotionally vivid, repeatedly reinforced internal image of what you are building, is the conscious mind's primary job in the autosuggestion process. Imagine telling an architect to design you something nice. They will produce something. It may even be beautiful, but it will not be the home you actually wanted, because the home you actually wanted existed only as a vague feeling that you never translated into a brief the architect could work with. Your subconscious operates on the same principle. Give it a feeling without a form, and it will produce movement without destination. Give it a clear, felt, specific form, and it will begin moving you toward that form in ways the conscious mind will often fail to predict or explain. There was a woman I once read about who had spent years pursuing financial stability with enormous effort and genuinely mixed results. She worked hard, she was strategic, she did many of the right things. But when she examined her inner practice, she found that her sense of what she was working toward was almost entirely abstract. More money, more security, more freedom, all real desires, but none of them a destination the subconscious could navigate toward. When she spent time, real, unhurried time, building a specific, detailed, emotionally alive image of the life she was constructing, the choices that followed became almost obvious. Not because the external world had changed, because her inner compass suddenly had somewhere to point. The precision Hill called for is not about rigid attachment to a single outcome. It is about giving your deeper intelligence something real to work on, a specific target that matters enough to feel, a destination that your conscious and subconscious minds can, for the first time, both agree on. There is one more layer to Hill's teaching on autosuggestion that deserves to be named clearly, because it is the one that separates the people who use this principle as a genuine tool from those who use it as a comfort measure. Hill called it faith, and he meant something very specific by it, not religious faith, not blind optimism, but what he described as a state of mind that can be induced through autosuggestion itself. Hill wrote that faith is a state of mind which may be induced or created by affirmation or repeated instructions to the subconscious mind through the principle of autosuggestion. Read that again slowly. He is saying that faith is not a prerequisite for autosuggestion. It is a product of it. You do not need to believe fully before you begin. You need only to begin consistently, emotionally, specifically, and the believing follows from the doing. This inverts the way most people approach this work entirely. Most people wait to feel ready. They wait to believe before they begin practicing. They hold autosuggestion at arm's length because it feels false, because the voice in them that knows how things have always been is louder than the voice of the new direction they're trying to establish. And so they never begin in earnest, because the faith that would make beginning feel natural is the very thing that the beginning, and only the beginning, can produce. Think of it like kindling a fire. The first spark does not produce warmth. The first spark produces the possibility of warmth if you add the right materials, if you protect the small flame from the wind long enough for it to grow into something self-sustaining. Faith in Hill's model is not the spark. It is the fire that grows from a spark that was struck in the dark before there was any reason to believe warmth was coming. There was a man I once heard described who had, by his own account, no natural capacity for the kind of inner conviction that Hill's books seem to require. He was skeptical by temperament, analytic by training, allergic to anything that felt like wishful thinking. He read Think and Grow Rich as an intellectual exercise and expected to be largely unconvinced. But something about the chapter on autosuggestion caught his attention, specifically Hill's claim that you do not need to believe in order to begin, that the belief comes from the practice, not before it. He decided, almost as an experiment, to practice exactly as described, consistently, specifically, emotionally for 90 days, reserving judgment. What he found at the end of those 90 days was not that he had become a different person or that his life had magically rearranged itself. What he found was that the quality of his inner conversation had genuinely changed, and the changed inner conversation was already producing different outer behaviors. Slowly, then unmistakably, the results followed the behaviors. Autosuggestion does not ask you to believe before you see. It asks you to act before you believe, and to trust that the believing will build itself from the acting. That is not a small thing. For many people, it is the most counterintuitive and most liberating idea they will ever encounter. And so we return to where we began, to that feeling of standing in the gap between the promise of Think and Grow Rich and the experience of your own unchanged life. We began by naming autosuggestion as the most misunderstood secret in the book. But here, at the end of the journey, a profound reversal presents itself. The reason autosuggestion is misunderstood is not that it is complicated, it is that it is intimate. It asks you to go somewhere most people are trained to avoid, into the actual unvarnished content of your own inner world. Not the curated version, not the practice statements, the real broadcast, the running commentary, the emotional weather that is happening beneath every thought you have about yourself and what you deserve and what is possible. That intimacy is the secret, not the technique, not the words, the willingness to actually show up inside your own mind with feeling, with specificity, with the particular kind of patient faith that Hill described as something you build, not something you find. And to begin the practice of directing the conversation rather than being directed by it. Napoleon Hill wrote about autosuggestion because he had watched it work repeatedly and unmistakably in the lives of people who had almost nothing else going for them. Not because they were special, because they were willing to do the inner work that most people, even people who have read the same books, will never quite commit to. If something in this conversation has moved something in you, if the gap between reading and living is starting to close even slightly, then the next step is yours to take. And if exploring these ideas more deeply feels like the kind of journey we're staying on, you already know where the next chapter is waiting. Not as a subscription, as a continuing conversation with the best of what you are becoming. The most misunderstood secret in Think and Grow Rich was never hidden. It was waiting all along for you to feel it.